All right, thank you everyone for coming. I'm Kimberly Schlarman. I'm the Community Engagement Librarian here at the Glenview Public Library. Today's presentation is a joint presentation with the Glenview, the Northbrook, and the Glencoe Public Libraries, as well as the League of Women Voters, Glenview-Glencoe. And I especially want to thank Pam Hay, who's a League member who's been really instrumental in putting this presentation together. Yeah. Thanks. I also wanted to mention that tonight's program is a hybrid program. So we have people joining us in the library, and we also have people who are joining us online. For everyone who's joining us online, please feel free to put in your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll address those if we have time. For people who are here in the library, you'll probably have to use one of these wireless mics to talk so everyone online can hear you. Okay. So tonight's presentation is going to be presented by Connie Meyer. And Connie teaches negotiation and mediation at Northwestern University as adjunct faculty at the School of Professional Studies and the McCormick School of Engineering. She's a facilitator, mediator, and coach with nearly 20 years of experience in the field of alternative dispute resolution. Connie's work has spanned corporate, nonprofit, and academic spheres and focuses on skills for effective negotiation, communication, and influence. She worked for many years as an instructor and coach for Fortune 500 managers and executives across multiple industries, helping them to build skills for managing their most important relationships. Currently, Connie works to advance cooperation across lines of religious difference as curriculum development consultant at Chicago nonprofit Interfaith America. She is twice certified as a mediator and underwent advanced negotiation and mediation training at Harvard Law School. She's logged hundreds of hours as a mediator for the Chicago Center for Conflict Resolution and has frequently served as a coach for mediators in training. Connie earned her MA in Intercultural Conflict Management from Lesley University and a BA in International Studies and History from Northwestern. So please welcome Connie. Thank you.
That's okay. Does this work? Can you check to make sure folks can hear me? What's that? This works less well? Well, it's for the people at home. Yeah, I'll project here. You tell me if you can't hear me in the back. Now we're good? Okay. So welcome everyone. Those of you at home, I was just saying you miss out a little bit tonight because the folks here in the room are going to work super hard up here with me in front of the room with themselves in their chairs, practicing some strategies for going from conflict to collaboration. But those of you at home can feel free to grab a spouse, a partner, a pet, a plant, and go ahead and do what practicing you can at home as well. We're here because one of the reasons this might be helpful for us tonight is because, as we all know, there's a lot of work to be done across our communities, right? We have to work with our neighbors who see things differently sometimes, right? On really important topics, right? So across our communities, we need to do things, we need to make decisions around how those communities work, what the government does, how we should treat each other, what our kids should learn, how we should spend money, right? These are important decisions that make up the sort of civic fabric of our communities. And we have to make those decisions with neighbors with whom we might not always see eye to eye, right? I don't have to tell you this. This has been everyone's lives for a while, keenly in the last few years in particular. Those conversations across difference are hard. Any conversations across difference can be hard. but they're particularly hard when we feel strongly about something. And these days, we all seem to feel strongly about something. There feels like there's a lot at stake in the conversations that we're having. These issues feel really important to our communities, to our families, to ourselves personally. And so we dig in. It's important. If it weren't important, we wouldn't be there. We wouldn't care. And it wouldn't be hard, by the way. But it is important. And so it is hard. The good news is that we can get better. We can practice and we can get better. There are skills and strategies for getting better. You won't get better tonight. You won't get better tomorrow, right? All the way. This is like a lifelong pursuit. These are skills that are hard. I've been doing this in a really focused way for a couple of decades, and I'm working every day, right? So it's a commitment to work, but we can get better. So we're going to do just a little bit of that work tonight and just practice a couple things and see that there are places where we can make change. We can move things in the right direction. So that's what we're going to do. So let's do it. So first thing, I want to start with an exercise. And those of you at home, again, this is an opportunity for you to try this on your own or with someone that's there with you. But in the room, what I'd like you to do. Oh, I lost my clicker. Just a second, technical difficulties. Kimberly, do you know why I don't have control over the slides anymore? Go ahead. Moment. So while Kimberly is taking care of that. Oh, great. I already met you, so we'll go by this part. Do a quick exercise. I'm going to have you in just a moment. I'm going to have you find a partner. You're going to find a partner here in the room. And once you find that partner, and that's going to take you 2 seconds, you're going to decide which one of you is the buyer and which one of you is the seller. Okay, so ready, find a partner and decide who's who. Go. Okay, everyone have a partner? Anyone not have a partner? Okay, anyone not know who you are? Okay, great. One of you is the buyer, one of you is the seller. So for a moment, I'm going to talk just to the sellers. So sellers, you know who you are. What happened now? What is going on? There we go. Sellers, you know who you are. What I would like you to do now is think of something that you actually own in real life that you love, like a thing that like you want everyone to have, like it's a heated coffee cup that keeps your coffee like the right temperature all the time, or it's like the bike gloves that let you go an extra 70 miles, whatever it is, right? What's a thing you actually own in real life that you love and you think everyone should have? Think of that. Sellers, think of that. Okay. Everybody got something? Yep. Think of something you love in real life. Okay, great. Now, sellers, you have precisely 1 minute only to sell that thing to your buyer, to convince your buyer to buy that thing. Do whatever it takes. You only have 1 minute. Ready? Go. Hello.
No, it was muted.
Oh, okay, great. All right, and stop. I'll stop you right there. Go ahead and stop. All right. So I have a question now for the buyers. So the other folks, the folks who are in the buyer chair. Buyers, this question is for you. What percentage of that minute would you estimate that your seller was talking? Shout it out. What percentage? 100%, 100%, 100%, I'm seeing that, 100%, great. 99, fabulous. That's common, right? So what I just did is a silly exercise to simulate a little bit in the room. One of the dynamics that is often getting in the way of our conversations, which is that when we care, when we really care about something, and by the way, when we also feel maybe a little bit of pressure, right? I simulated some time pressure in this silly scenario, right? When we feel pressure, we feel like something is important, there's a lot at stake, and we care, we tend to want to talk a lot, tell you a lot about what it is right, give you the facts, make sure you know, convince you that, and we do a whole heck of a lot less of listening, of trying to understand, of asking questions, right? That's just true. And it will be for the rest of your lives, by the way. That's how it works. When we care, we want to share more than we want to listen. The challenge is that that dynamic really, really gets in the way when we want to have these important conversations. So if we want to be effective in these civic spaces, in our communities, et cetera, in everywhere in our lives, actually, we have to figure out how to flip that. We have to train our brains to push back against our natural tendencies in the direction of being able to notice that we want to share and wait a sec and do some asking, do some questions first, do some wondering about what's going on the other side of the table before we go too far and too fast down the path of our own logic, our own reasoning, our own side of the story. And by the way, we don't just need to get better at this at the level of conversations. So in any given conversation that we should do this, but really at the level of our entire approach to the conversations, to the issues, right? How can we be better at thinking when we think of an entire issue or a whole process that we'll go through as a community? How can I enter this process in a way that puts learning forward and my sharing just a little bit behind that? Not that we're going to get rid of it, because it's really important that you share what you have to share. Your view is important too. You don't want to get rid of it, but maybe just put it a step back so that your view can be heard even more thoroughly a little bit further down the line. So we're going to do some work tonight to practice with that. This is how we're going to approach the next 75 minutes. I'm going to talk just for a second about our goal in these conversations, because your mindset really, really matters, but I only have a little bit of time to do it. So we're just going to give you like the short and dirty version of like why our goal matters. And then we're going to focus our time in a couple of places where we can get stuck and work on some strategies for getting unstuck. So parts 1 and parts 2. I'll let you find out what those are next. And then finally, but what happens if there's a whole bunch of feelings? We're going to talk just for a second about that, because that's often a conversation or a question that comes up around these conversations is like, yeah, but what if everybody feels really strongly about this? What do we do then? So that's our agenda for tonight. Here's how we get started. So just a beat about our mindset, our frame for these conversations. If I had all the time in the world, we would be spending a couple of days on this, because really, if your brain, your mindset isn't in the right place, you could do a whole bunch of work trying to change the skills, trying to change what's coming out of your mouth. It's not going to get very far. So we want to think even in this short period of time about our goal. In these conversations that feel really important, for a lot of us, whether we do it consciously or subconsciously, the goal that we end up entering the conversation with is to convince, to persuade, to show them that, to make sure they know, right? The problem with that is that the more we enter a conversation with a goal to persuade, the less likely we are to be very persuasive. Let me say that again. The more our goal in our heads, or consciously or otherwise, is to persuade, the much less likely it is that we will be persuasive. The things that we do when our goal is to persuade, the things that kind of flow naturally from us when in our head is make them see, the things that we do tend to actually backfire, tend to get in our way, tend to make it so that we're less likely to be heard, less likely to be influential. There are a lot of different things that are going on there. Some of them we'll explore in just a little bit when we get into some of the skills work. But just one thing, for example, just to show you one of the things that we sort of invite into our world when we try so hard, to persuade, is something called the backfire effect. Has anyone heard of the backfire effect? This is fascinating. It's not happening all the time. It's not the reason for all of our struggles, but it is real. And most of us have sort of probably experienced something like this. The backfire effect says that when a person has a strong belief, so if they could go either way, this doesn't really apply. But when someone believes strongly in something, they feel strongly about something, and then we go to them with opposite data, right? So we think they should change their mind. We go to them and say, no, but listen, here's all the things you should know about the other way of thinking about this. You should change your mind. You are wrong. We give them evidence to the contrary. Even if we do it in a polite way, in a civil way, in a lovely way, what is sometimes likely to happen is that then that person that you just tried to change their mind, they actually walk away with the same belief, and it's now stronger than it was if they had never talked to you. So we think we're doing folks a service. We think we're going to be more influential. We think we're going to change minds by giving them lots of facts, lots of data, telling them again why they're wrong. And in fact, what we can do inadvertently is strengthen their original belief, which is fascinating. So this is, again, just one of the things that's happening when we are trying so hard to persuade. So if we want to be influential, if we want to be persuasive, if we want to be heard, and if we want to critically get to the best answers, get to sustainable solutions, get to conversations that feel productive for our community, we need to change our goal first and foremost. And this is hard. This is the hardest work. And this is the work that you have to do all the time, constantly reminding yourself about what is my goal? What is my goal? We have to shift our goal from persuasion, at least for now. Maybe later on, you're feeling like you're pushing more in that direction, but at the beginning, shifting our goal from persuasion to learning. So I want my goal at the beginning of tough conversations where I know there's difference. First and foremost, if I can work to get myself into a place of wanting to learn. So where are they coming from? How on earth did they get to that? How do they see it? I wonder what's going on underneath that opinion. I wonder where that came from in the first place, right? All of those sorts of wondering questions are very, very helpful to try to get up to the surface early on. So if our goal is to learn, it turns out we'll do things that will actually lead it to be more likely that we could have influence, that we could persuade. So it's a very sort of counterintuitive thing. If you want to persuade, you should probably try to stop trying to persuade. If you want to persuade, maybe stop trying to persuade for a little while at least. All right, so that's the big mindset shift that I wish I could spend a day working on with you, and I can't. So with that in mind, we're going to do some actual skills work around some things we can do that are in service of moving in the direction of, that's okay. It's like a little sort of jazzy background transition music for this next little bit. I like it, and here we go into the skills, right? So the next bits of work that we're going to do are sort of in service of this learning, in service of shifting our conversations in the direction of trying to learn so that we can get to good answers, right? Because it's not just about learning. We then need to get work done. We need to figure out what we're going to do next. We need to decide on the policy, et cetera, right? So it can't just stop at learning, but that's a good place to start. Okay, so to do this work first, the first bit of work, we're going to have you think of a real conversation from your real life that was difficult. If you want to think of a conversation that's in a civic, community, neighborhood context, cool, but it doesn't have to be. It could be any conversation from your life where you really felt like you locked horns with someone. It was hard. And it could be from your family life, it could be from work, it could be really from anywhere. So you're going to think of a conversation, and then I want you in that memory to try to kind of zoom into the most difficult part of the conversation. Obviously, you're not going to remember specific words that were said back and forth. But what I want you to do is to script out, and we have some pencils and paper in case you don't have any of it. I would like you to write down 7 to 10 lines of a script of what was being said at that hardest place in that difficult conversation. Again, you don't know verbatim what you said, but just generally what was being said somewhere in the realm of 7 to 10 lines of I said, they said, I said, they said, actually write out the script. Any questions about your task? Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes to go ahead and write out your script. If you have questions along the way, please raise a hand. Those of you at home can absolutely be doing this along with us. In fact, I would very highly recommend that you do, because this next bit of work you can do just as easily from your chairs at home as you could be doing here in the room. No, yes, that's a good caveat. No one else is going to be reading this, and you don't need to share any of it with anyone that you don't want to. So feel free to be honest. Whatever came up, came up. Thirty more seconds. All right, looks like most folks are done. If you're still jotting, that's fine. Okay, so hold on to those scripts for just a second. I'm going to share with you just some couple of basic skills that we tend to use in any given conversation. These are not going to seem like rocket science, but I'm going to use particular vocabulary, and then we're going to use that vocabulary for the rest of the way through. Three key communication skills I want to share. One, at any given point in the conversation, we might be advocating. We're going to use the word advocacy here. I just mean whenever we share our perspective. So this is not advocacy in the sort of social justice sort of, or whatever other kind of like political universe where you're trying very strongly to push one thing forward or an idea forward, not that kind of advocacy. In this communication skills model, advocacy is just simply anytime we share something from our perspective, anytime we share our story, our view. Okay, so that's advocacy, sharing our own view. Inquiry is asking a question, asking about their view, right? Fairly simple. Anytime we're curiously, genuinely trying to understand their view. So hear that curiously, genuinely part, because if I ask you, what are you, nuts? There's a question mark at the end of that, and it's grammatically a question, but in this model, we would not call that inquiry. That's not inquiry. So inquiry is genuinely asking a question, and then acknowledgement, the last of these three key skills, anytime you might simply confirm what you heard the other person saying. So you're acknowledging in some way that you heard about what their perspective is. So these three things might be in play. So it's a very interesting exercise in our conversations in retrospect or live to consider which of these skills is showing up. So what I want you to do now is look back at your script and you're going to score that conversation. And by score, I mean, I'd like you to put an A next to anything that is advocacy, someone sharing their own view. And you're going to score both sides of the conversation, yours and theirs. Put an A next to anything that is anytime someone shares their own view. Put an I next to anytime someone asks a curious, genuine question. So if you see a question mark, really examine those questions. If that question is intending to teach, to show, to make a point, those are not questions. That's not inquiry. So that would actually be marked with an A, because that's actually veiled advocacy. If I say, what are you, nuts? That's me advocating that I think you're nuts. That's me sharing my view. It's actually advocacy, even though it's grammatically a question. So go ahead and take 30 seconds and just run down the lines that you wrote on your paper. Every line should have either an A or an I, advocacy or inquiry. If there's an acknowledgement on there, just kind of ignore that for now. We're just going to focus on advocacy and inquiry. Those of you at home, I hope you're also scoring your sheets. It looks like most folks here are done. I have a question for you. How many straight A students do we have in the room? Lots. You all can't see, but I don't know, about half the room raised their hand. How many of you have majority A's? Almost everyone. Is there anybody that had about 50-50? Oh, great. Awesome. We're going to have, Elisa's going to teach the second half of the class. How about more inquiry than advocacy, actually? No, almost never happens. That's not good either, by the way, but I'll get into that. So this is the hallmark of a difficult conversation. There is no balance between these three skills. There's no balance whatsoever. It's almost entirely advocacy. I will tell you what I think, and then you will tell me what you think, and then I will do the same again. And we just share opinions back and forth again and again and again. Neither one of us is actually listening. Neither one of us is actually asking genuine, curious questions. Neither one of us is acknowledging the other person's view. It's just what happens. We all know this. You can feel it. You know what those conversations feel like. We've done it a billion times. But the awareness that that's what's happening, that there are these different skills we can choose to use. They're simple ones. That awareness is really powerful because in the moment, we can catch ourselves advocating, and pull back and say, wait a second, what if I asked a question? Maybe just one, maybe I could squeeze out one curious question in here, right? It's hard, but even just one little question, or maybe pausing and taking a breath for a second, and for a second, not sharing your view, but saying, so I think what I heard you say is this, or it really sounds like you're frustrated about that. Just that can really change the dynamics quite quickly, actually. One and done is not going to work. You got to keep going, but it can, even just one little shift can make a difference. So this is really powerful awareness that we can use right now, like tomorrow, today, tonight, when you go home, you can manage the balance of these skills. So that's piece one. That's where we can get stuck, is when we don't have a lot of balance in our skills. And it's a place where we can free ourselves from that stuckness with some patience and some work and some commitment. So we want to get these three skills more balanced. So that's quantity, right? The quantity of these skills matters. Also, though, the quality of how you use them, when you use them, how you use them, is also helpful. And so the next tool that we will get into helps us to think a little bit about how the quality and flow of these skills and sort of how to get to places in our conversations that are more productive. Before I go there though, I just did want to pause for a second and see any questions that come up for you already around sort of advocacy, inquiry, acknowledgement, the balance here. Just wanted to check in. Yep, go ahead.
What about listening without judgment?
What about it? Do you think it's a good idea? Yeah?
That's the place where you really want to go is.
Yeah.
And tell me more, ask the question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. What about listening without judgment? Absolutely. Listening and actually listening, you know, not just listening so that you can come back with a stronger argument or so that you can shoot them down or whatever. Like sometimes we listen for the wrong reasons, right? But listening without judgment, in fact, to learn is really important. Great. Oh, by the way, I realized I've skipped something. I want you all to have an opportunity to try this in your conversation. So hold on. I wondered why I was way so far ahead. What I'd like you to try to do is go back to your conversations now. Go back to your script. Many of you discovered that there was not a lot of balance. So what I want you to do is go back in time. Imagine that you can go back in time. You're going to go back to that conversation. You're going to cross out one place where you advocated, where maybe you could have inquired or acknowledged instead. And I want you to actually write the question. I want you to write the new question that you would have asked instead, or I want you to write the acknowledgement that you would put there instead. So I'll give you an example. In my script, I had something that sounded like, and I'm like, oh, that's advocacy. Okay, so I'm going to go back in time and I'm going to cross it out and wonder what could I have asked at that point? And I could ask, what makes you say that? Genuine inquiry, right? So that's what I'm asking you to do now. So cross out one thing that you said that was advocacy in a place where you think maybe inquiry or acknowledgement might have been helpful, and go ahead and slot in, write out the new inquiry or the new acknowledgement. Those of you that are watching from home, please do the same. Follow along. All right. So as I said, no one needs to share anything from your personal conversations that you don't want to. For those of you that would be willing to share, I would love to hear just one, if someone wants to volunteer, the advocacy that you had originally that you crossed out, and I'm curious what you replaced it with. Who would like to share one advocacy that they crossed out? We can go back there, and then what you replaced it with. Just 1 minute, we'll get you the microphone so folks at home can hear. So what was your original? Oh, I think right behind her, actually, in the checkered.
Sorry.
Yep, there you go. What was your original statement?
It starts out, because this is actually a group of us, they say he deserves it. And our response was, no, he doesn't. And rather than saying, no, he doesn't, we should have said, why do you feel he deserves it?
Great. So no, he doesn't, to why do you feel that? Great. So let's ask the room. Genuine inquiry? Yes, this is great. Wonderful, right? So just instead of like coming back with a I'll tell you differently, instead kind of pulling back for a second and wondering why. Why do you say that? Why do you feel that? Somebody else want to volunteer an example? Yep. Hold on, let's just get you the, oh, there's a mic. There you go.
So I would be saying to this person something that's important to me. This is important to me,
Uh-huh.
a change that I want. And the individual gets, in my opinion, defensive and starts making it into a larger issue.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't seem to be hearing me.
Yep.
I can then say to him, I thought I was telling you something different. What makes you say what you just said?
Great. Great. So I thought I was saying, so instead of just saying, this is important to me, we're kind of just continuing to say like the same thing again and again. We cross it out and you say, I thought I was saying X. What makes you say Y? Right. Great. What do we think? Genuine inquiry?
Yeah, but I would say what makes you think rather than what makes you say.
What makes you say or think? Yeah, either way.
We don't know what he's thinking.
Yeah.
We only know what he said.
Yeah, exactly. Either one is a good, genuine question. I'm genuinely curious. What makes you say that? What makes you think that? Or what makes, what makes, whatever, it doesn't matter. Either one is nice and curious. And this is a nice, which skill is this here? I thought I was saying X. Advocacy, right? It's just it's skillful advocacy, just sort of sharing. I thought I was saying X. You seem to be hearing something else or responding to something different. What makes you say that, right? That's great. It's pairing advocacy, skillful advocacy, where it's not combative. It's not about defensiveness, but it's about sharing in a skillful way, and then pairing that with some inquiry. Great. Anybody else want to share? Elisa? Okay. Sure. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
So in this instance, the conversation that I was having was someone was telling me how I do things. And initially I said, well, actually, I do it this way, and was explaining what I normally do.
Yeah.
And so I would like to go back in time and punch her in the face. No.
She said it, not me, not my recommendation.
But for the sake of this lecture today, I would like to go back in time. And what I'm wondering is if she was telling me that report cards were done this way. So I was wondering if I could say, have you read report cards and their comments and seen this evidence? And I don't know if that ends up sounding like me veiled advocacy, like calling her out on not actually knowing what she's talking about. Or if that comes off as genuine inquiry.
Let's ask the room. Survey says?
Not inquiry.
No, it's not. Good. And you knew it wasn't either,
Yeah,
right? So thank you for volunteering it, because this is a really helpful example of where we like slyly include advocacy. Look at me. Look at me. I'm asking a question. I'm very curious. Right? Right? No, this is veiled advocacy. What is the statement that she's actually making here? Well, yes. Don't you know I'm right? If you did more research, you would know, or whatever, right? Or just simply like, it might be helpful for you to look at report cards and know more about this kind of evidence, right? It doesn't have to be super snarly. It could just be sort of like, well, one of the things I'm looking at is the report cards and this evidence or whatever, right? Whatever the context is. All that needs to happen to fix this is to just make it a statement and don't put it in the conversation as kind of a question. Why is that? Why would I recommend, do you think, that if I have something to say, I say it straight, as opposed to say it kind of with a question mark at the end? Like these questions come out like, don't you think it'd be a good idea if we, haven't you ever thought about, what's wrong with that? Yeah, we can hear it, right? Like human beings can hear that there's you have an opinion, and it annoys me that you won't just say it, right? Like we don't like it when people like package it in a question. We do it all the time, myself included, of course. So one of the things we can get better at is just noticing when we accidentally do that and just trying to separate them out a little bit. So what's a curious question that you might have asked in this moment?
I didn't want to be a copycat.
Uh-huh.
Sorry.
I didn't want to be a copycat, but it kind of feels like what makes you say that is just like the generic, really good inquiry question across the board. And if I had just said, what makes you say that? Then she could have opened up the door that she doesn't read any report card comments, right? I'm here for a reason.
It's so wonderful. And by the way, Lisa and I have known each other for over 20 years, I think. So this is why she's a special guest. So yeah, so you can hear like really when we feel strongly about something, it is in there, right? Yeah, so it's really hard to actually come up with a curious question when we are convinced that they're wrong. And when we are convinced that our job here is to make them see that they're wrong. Right. So the more we get sort of fixed in our position, the harder it is to actually come up with curious questions. We can't think of one like, wow, what would I ask this idiot? Right. Like you can't come up with it. Right. So we have to like sort of, when you find yourself stuck, you've got to do a little bit of that goal shifting, like in the moment, sort of like, I am stuck. This conversation is terrible. This is super frustrating. How can I get out of here? Or how can I shift this, right? It's sort of like, okay, so I'm pushing. What can I do to just like lay off for a second? What if just for a minute, I assumed that maybe there's some kind of logic happening on the other side? What would I want to learn? And maybe you can't do that in the moment, by the way. Maybe you're like so angry, so triggered that you need to like step away and go do some work on your own to try to get curious and then come back to the conversation, maybe start over. But in this moment, we can do a couple of things. We can sort of say, well, I do it this way, share this big thought that's on my mind. Like for me, one of the things that's most important is this particular process. This is what's always guided my work. From what I've seen, it's really best practice. But I'm curious, are you looking at that same sort of stuff, or do you think about this differently? What is it that informs your approach to this? Because honestly, I'm having a really hard time because this feels like the best approach. And part of what might happen when we're in a situation like this where we feel so strongly is that you have to put your view into the conversation a little first, just because it's so distracting to you, right? If Elisa doesn't say, look, this is really hard because for me, it's clear this is the way to go about this. And I'm frustrated because I hear you not on board with that. She might have to say something like that first so that she can free up her mind to then ask the next question. So there's no like, this is not like a science in that we do it the same way every time. We have to be very kind to ourselves, to be very kind to them, and we have to just keep trying. Did I see a hand? Yeah.
Yeah. If you know you're going into a difficult conversation, and I'm thinking, what I wrote, I asked to meet someone and I think he knew it was going to be a difficult conversation. Is there an opening question to sort of disarm or change? Can you say, I'm really happy that you agreed to meet with me. Why? Why did you agree to meet with me? I mean, are there those kinds of opening questions that, I don't know.
I may table that question because I think that gets into a whole other, I'm not sure we have time to go down there, but it's worth thinking about how you open the conversation, because what you do first is going to set the tone. And if you can do something that is either curious or that is honest about the way that it feels hard for you and that you want to be curious, maybe, but even that's hard for you, you can change things up, right? Because people are expecting you to come in and plead your case. Right? So if you don't do that, already you've shifted something. So if you come in and say, I can imagine we probably see this pretty differently. And honestly, I'm a little trepidatious about the conversation. But I really want to better understand where you're coming from at the end of the day. That might actually be hard for me in this conversation because I feel really strongly about what we're about to talk about. But I want you to know up front, I really am curious. But I might need your patience as I try to like work at that curiosity because I feel really strongly. So like sometimes it's about being real about what's happening for you and letting your guard down a little bit and not coming in like in full battle mode. And to do something different like that at the beginning of a conversation can really surprise people. They're not expecting that necessarily. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
It seems like in old times, my inquiry would be about the person's personal experience, because that would have informed their view. But now it seems like whatever their news source is more of that. And I think that that's what feels so, you're not just talking to a person who had an experience and then maybe they're going to hear other experiences and, consider something, but feel like you're against a big monolith, I guess.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, yes, right. We live in this world where we have these like very loud public narratives that are very different on both sides or all sides. And much of what people are bringing to conversations comes from their social media feed or whatever news source they're watching. And if we'll get into this in a second, actually, if we have very vastly different sources, that makes things harder, right? The second thing would be a question for you, actually. In these crazy times, would you say that when people come to you and ask about your experience, how much would you say what you're sharing with them is coming out of your personal experience versus what's coming from your news sources? Right? So my suspicion is that these times make us feel like each other are just our news. But I think each of us individually would probably say, I'm not just my news. I can tell you all about my personal experiences that inform this issue. So part of it is to be curious about whether or not that's actually true. My suspicion is most people would have things to tell you. Some of them might be because I heard it on X news channel, but I bet there's more than that. So it's interesting to wonder, because I think we are all still quite round people. And the media tries to flatten us into certain very uninteresting shapes. So no matter what you believe, I'm pretty sure we're pretty round and there's much to be explored there. So let's move on where I was about to go a moment ago to this getting stuck part 2, because it actually starts to get at some of these very dynamics. So if our 3 skills, inquiry, advocacy, acknowledgement, help us to, the awareness of those 3 and how they play alongside each other, help us to be aware of their quantity in a conversation. As I started to say, this next tool that we're going to look at helps us to think about the quality of those skills and how they flow. And it starts to help us understand this very issue of where are people coming from and how do we explore that in a way that's productive. So I want to do this, start this next bit off with a case. I would like a volunteer who would come up and just read a script with me in front of the room. You don't need to do anything else but read a script with me in front of the room. What's that? You will? Come on up, come on up. Round of applause, please. Remind me your name. Beth. Okay, this is for you. Gonna need a mic. Okay, so Beth, you're gonna be playing the role of Alex. And we have copies of the case in case anybody likes to just be able to see it, wants to follow along. I don't know if Kimberly, you're able to share the case file with folks at home. If so, cool. If not, folks at home, just listen carefully. So Beth and I are going to role play a case. You have it there in front of you in case that's helpful. Just notice what's happening and we'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. So I'm Terry, you're Alex. Okay. I just saw the new social studies curriculum at the middle school. It reeks of critical race theory. Can you believe the school district is shoving that liberal nonsense down our throats?
Are you serious? I happen to think it's great. It's about time.
No way. The school has no business feeding our kids that one version of history.
It's exactly the role of a school to help our kids understand history. And it's about time that history included a fuller picture of racism in this country.
Yeah, no, there are lots of different ways to think about racism in this country, and I will not have a small group of know-it-all administrators deciding which version my kid hears.
Again, that's exactly what schools are for. That's exactly the role of school administrators.
Nope, not when it comes to something as important and divisive as this. Our kids have been well educated for years without this political nonsense. There is no room for it.
There's no room for important discussions about a huge part of our history. discussions about history that affects people in our community in big ways every day.
No, there is plenty of room for schools to be covering important history, just not something this controversial.
Unbelievable.
Oh. Thank you, and scene. Thank you, Beth. All right, so what do we notice based on what we've learned so far, or just generally your life experience? What is going on in this conversation? All A's, right? Do we see? Anybody else notice that? Is there any inquiry whatsoever? No, Alex asked, Beth asked, are you serious? No. There's no room for important discussions about a huge part of our history, right? That's right. You guys, you're smarter than that, right? You can see veiled inquiry, all sorts, or veiled advocacy, all advocacy, if you were to score that case, right? So there's that quantity piece that is stuck. Any other thoughts about what's going on there?
Nobody moved.
Nobody moved. In what way?
Nobody changed, and nobody, there was some persuasion. There was some persuasion attempts, but nobody was moving off their dime. They had their opinion before they got there, and they weren't changing from this conversation.
Yep. So here, I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. No, I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. No, I'm
Instead of
gonna
are
tell
you
why you're wrong.
serious, I would say the question would be, can you tell me what you think critical race theory really is?
Yeah.
That's a serious question.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're curious about that.
I
So
am.
actually, let's do this now. What I would like is to have someone else who would like to come up and be Alex. Beth did a great job the first time around at being Beth or Alex or whatever. Who would like to come up and try to do this differently with me? You don't have to be super skillful or anything. Just try one thing that might change things up. Who would like to do it? All right, great. Wonderful. Round of applause. It's a very big, brave thing to do. Come on up. Okay. So I'm just gonna like give you a line. We don't have to go anything on the script. You just do what you want to try to do it differently. Okay. So yeah, can you believe this social studies curriculum? I mean, it's nuts. It is like so liberal, snowflakey, everything, this whole like, I can't handle it.
So what is it specifically about the curriculum that's bothering you?
Specifically, like they don't need to be teaching critical race theory in our schools.
So it's critical race theory that's the concern for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's this particular version of what they're trying to shove down our kids' throats, you know, so like, I don't even know if it's like, no, it's political. I don't need politics at my school, you know?
Okay, I'm just trying to help me understand what it is that's really bothering you about this.
Well, for one, nobody asked, like, I'm pretty sure there was no checking in with the community, checking with the parents, checking in with anybody about the fact that this pretty controversial thing should be part of the curriculum. I think you can't just be shoving this stuff down people's throats.
So you sound really frustrated with not having a voice in this?
Totally. Yeah, it's a huge deal. Okay, pause for a second. Wow, again. Co-instructors all around. This is amazing. This is great. Tell me your name again. Kate. Kate. What did you see Kate do that changed this version to feel different? How do we know she listened? What did you hear her say that sounded like acknowledgement?
I see you're frustrated.
I see you're frustrated. Yep. Great. What else?
So you feel you want to say.
You want to say, right? That is such beautiful acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is like my favorite thing, and nobody does it. It's so powerful. I mean, we do it with our like friends and family and like in non-tricky situations, but in hard situations, we so rarely acknowledge the other person's view, and it's so powerful. What else? So you heard some really good acknowledgement. What else did you hear? What else did she do that was so helpful?
She asked a lot of questions.
Yeah, she asked a lot of questions. Did they seem curious, genuine? Yeah, they really did. I didn't hear, could you tell me what her view is? No. That's how you know if you're asking questions that aren't questions. If you can hear your view in the question, it's not a good question, right? I could not hear her view in the questions. They seemed real and genuine. That's great. Okay, Yeah.
So, but the one thing that I did, and this was going to be my question, was I said, you seem frustrated by not, and then I tried to explain why you were probably frustrated. Full disclosure, I used to teach a course on this kind of thing. And empathy was a big part of the, displaying empathy is a big part of having a difficult conversation and
100%.
empathizing with not just what they're saying, but what they're feeling or what they must be feeling.
Totally.
So that was going to be my question to you. Where
Yeah.
does that fit in with what you were just saying?
Yeah. Get rid of this mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. You did two things that you're going to see me recommend again later. Also, when it comes to feelings, naming a feeling, which is very helpful, a form of acknowledgement. And then also naming like what's really happening, saying it back. Like she did a good job of hearing what my concern was. Oh, it's actually has a lot to do with just like the fact that nobody asked you, you didn't have a say. And to name that, and she could name that and I could say, that's not it at all. And then go on to tell her what it was, in fact. Either way, she learned something. Either way, I feel like she's paying attention. It's very powerful. So that's great. So already you see like all sorts of shifts and, you know, with your very skillful background, you're able to move us forward very quickly, which is great. You see how things can shift when there are curious questions, when there is acknowledgement as part of the mix, right? As I said, you're not going to let go of advocacy. Kate is going to want to share as part of the conversation what she believes, assuming it's something different, but just not right away. And most likely, after she's done such a good job of acknowledging what I am saying and feeling and asking me where I'm coming from, I'm going to be much more likely to listen to her when she does share her opinion, which is the point, right? We want to be heard. So the tool that's going to help us organize ourselves to be able to ask really great questions like this and acknowledge effectively and still also share our view in a way that makes sense and that will be influential is a tool called the ladder of inference. How many of you have heard of the ladder of inference? Oh, brand new. This is exciting. The ladder of inference is a tool that was developed by a fellow at Harvard Business School a long time ago named Chris Ardress. And it is one of the most powerful communication concepts out there, I think. And it's very simple and for me is something I think about all the time. So I'm going to quickly just describe to you what the tool is, and then we're going to use it to see how we can get further along with this case and your own cases. All right, so here's how it works. It's quite simple. There is, first of all, so we have this ladder. This is just a very lovely visual to keep in mind. Each of us has a pool of data. So this little blue blurb here is a pool at the bottom of this ladder. Each of us has access to a pool of data. By data, I don't mean facts, figures, things that you find in the library. I mean any information about the world, observable information about the world, right? So the color of this carpet, the temperature of the air in here, what you all are wearing, that's all data, right? It's observable stuff in the world. From the moment we wake up in the morning and open our eyes, we're just flooded by data, right? There's information coming at us all the time at warp speed from all directions. But we have access to this pool of data. And this pool of data has been forming since we were born and continues to be forming as you sit here tonight. So that's at the bottom, at the base of our ladders. This first rung of the ladder then is data that I select. So there is so much data in the world, we can't actually pay attention to all of it or our brains would explode, which is not the scientific way to think about that, but it would be really bad, I think, if we could take it all in. We can't, our brains are not that powerful. So we have to filter. We have to decide what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. So for example, imagine I walked into this room this evening to get ready for this presentation. And there's a lot of things I could pay attention to, right? I could pay attention to what the carpet looks like or the temperature of the air. But I didn't pay attention to that because it doesn't really matter to me, right? I would pay attention to like whether or not the flip charts were here and where the chairs were positioned, things that I care about. I selected that data to pay attention to. So that's the first piece, is that we have all this data, we only pay attention to some of it. The next rung is interpretation. Interpretation. So we take this data and we make sense of it. We make meaning of the data that we've selected. So I'll give you another like simple example. Imagine I get up in the morning, I've eaten my breakfast, I'm standing at the counter or at the sink washing dishes, and I'm looking out the window that's in front of me. There's all sorts of things I could pay attention to out the window. That's all the data that's available to me, but I pay attention to the fact that there are some dark clouds in the sky, right? So I see some dark clouds in the background. I don't pay attention to the squirrel who's eating something over here. I don't pay attention to the two kids going around the corner. I do pay attention to the dark clouds in the back. My interpretation based on my experience with weather, my experience the news I read that morning when I woke up and looked at my phone, my interpretation is those look like very significant rain clouds. It's highly likely to rain, right? So I make meaning of it. So the data is just dark clouds. I pay attention to those dark clouds, and then I make meaning of it to think that looks like rain. And then that leads us to the final rung of the ladder, which is that I come to a conclusion. My conclusion maybe in this simple scenario is it's very likely to rain today. I should bring an umbrella to work, right? So we're doing this, we're going up our ladders like this from data to conclusions at the speed of light all the time, and we are not aware of what we're doing. That's just what we do to make sense of the world. We wouldn't have time to actually slow it down and do this consciously for every single decision that we make. We're constantly doing this subconsciously. Questions so far about what I mean by these like different rungs on the ladder? Okay. This is all fine. This is cool. This is how we get around the world in an effective and efficient way. The challenge comes in because guess what? They also have a ladder. And their pools of data, a pool of data and our pool of data might overlap. Maybe we both read the same emails. Maybe we have the same supervisor. Maybe we've both been at the same PTA meetings, whatever it is, right? There are some things that we have in common in terms of information we have access to. Maybe we both listen to NPR in the mornings, whatever, right? So we have some data that overlaps, but there's also a bunch of data that doesn't overlap. We are not in each other's business from the moment we wake up in the morning until the end of night. I mean, I don't know that that is true for anyone, right? So there's some stuff that they see that I don't see in the first place. We just have access to different data. Even if we paid attention to this, even if we had the same data in our pools, our data selected might not be the same. We might not pay attention to the same data. One of the examples of this that I find fascinating is my husband is a jazz musician. He plays the saxophone. And I discovered well into our relationship that he and I listen to songs totally differently on the songs on the radio. So we listen to the same songs, have like the same song. I know all the words and he doesn't know any, because he does not listen to the words. They're irrelevant to him. He listens to the bass line, he listens to the horns in the background, whatever. He could tell you all about the song, could not tell you any of the words. So it's an example of like, we have the same data, but we select different data to pay attention to. He still doesn't know the words to anything. It's just crazy. And then even if we've selected the same data, even if we're looking at the same report, we're looking at the exact same news story, we might interpret it differently. What do we use to interpret the data? What are things that influence our interpretation of data? How do we interpret data? Worldview, yeah? What else? What's important to us? What we care about? And where does that come from? Our experiences, what else? Our background. What kinds of backgrounds? Cultural background, what we do for work, what our family's like, our education, right? So we might look at the exact same report, but you work in operations, and I work in marketing, we're going to look at that report very differently. We'd probably select different data in the first place to look, pay attention to, and then even if we look at the same piece of data, we might interpret it differently, right? Which of course then oftentimes leads to different conclusions, right? So lots of different places where our ladders can kind of diverge, right? And again, that is not necessarily problematic. That's just humans. That's just humans. The problem is how we choose to have conversations across those different ladders. Where would you suspect that we're mostly having conversations across these ladders? Where are we having conversations? At what level of the ladder? Way at the top, right? This is what we're doing in difficult conversations. Let me tell you what's right. No, I'll tell you what's right. I'm going to tell you again what's right. Are you serious? I'm going to tell you again what's right. Right? That's all we do is go back and forth, advocacy, 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 advocacy. That's where we get stuck. So the ladder, this is helpful because then it gives us a clue to what we could do to get unstuck. What do we do here to get unstuck? If you think about the ladder of inference as a guide. What should we do? If this is bad, what should we do? Go down the ladder. We need to get lower on the ladder, right? So this is not helpful. Down here is all this rich information that's going to help us get to the best possible solutions. Down here is all this rich information that's going to help us finally unlock what we need to do here because we better understand where we're coming from. We might still very much disagree, but we could see why we disagree and try to figure that out and figure out some next steps for it, right? So ideally, instead of just doing this, what we want to do is walk down their ladder as much as possible. And we do this with our 3 skills. So asking good questions to say, so you think critical race theory has no place in our schools? Tell me more about that. Like, what informs that view? What have you seen that makes you worried about critical race theory? Like, what is it? What do you know about it? What bothers you about it? And maybe they say, what bothers me about it is, that it's so political, right? Tell me more about what feels political to you about it. What does that mean to you? When you say political, what does that mean? What do you think? All these different questions we can ask to get at these rungs of the ladder. And ideally, what we're doing is we're starting in some of these conversations, at least very early on, we're trying to figure out this side of the ladder. So asking good questions to understand what's going on. Then in the middle here is kind of where you'd have the acknowledgement piece. Oh, I see. So one of the things, so part of what's so hard about this for you, or what you're so upset about, is that there was no say from the community in choosing this as part of the curriculum, even though it feels like it's something controversial. So you're really frustrated, right? So doing some acknowledgement before sharing our ladder. And then when we share on our side of the ladder, we go up from the bottom instead of down from the top. So sharing low on the ladder. Okay, so I think I have a better sense of why this feels really frustrating to you and why you're upset that this is part of the curriculum. Would it be okay if I share a little bit about how I see it? And by the way, that is a really powerful question, because most people will say yes, and then you've got permission to share your view, right? As opposed to just them feeling like it's being shoved down their throats. Could I share a little bit about how I see it? And then you say, so, well, from my perspective, I have, my sister's kids have had critical race theory as part of their curriculum for a couple of years. And I've seen it have really positive effects in that school. So that's part of why I don't feel so nervous about it, right? So sharing the data and coming on up, right? That is a much more productive flow generally than this. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll get your thought, is this is obviously not like, it's not step by step and then that's it. Oh, look, this is like an iterative process, and sometimes you'll get stuck back up at the top, and then you realize, oh, I were at the top again, and then you go down, and then sometimes you're working on your ladder, and then you realize, well, we didn't work on theirs very much, so it's like back and forth. So it's not like so clean as that, but this is a very healthy flow. Go ahead. The mic is coming here for you.
I was thinking that, and sometimes we get so involved with our emotions about things that by doing these types of steps, we're taking the emotionality out of it and getting to the rational part of it. And that's what's really important. And if you can get people to be rational rather than just totally emotional, and it's tough.
I wish, Beth. Unfortunately, it's physiologically impossible to take out the emotions. I'll talk about that in just a moment. It's always if you didn't have feelings about it, you wouldn't be there. You're going to have emotions, and it's a myth that we can just like separate them and do this rationally. It's a myth. So what's more important is that we explore why we feel so strongly about this. Like, it's okay. It's okay that you feel totally crazy strongly about this. I want to know why. And you know what? I feel super strongly about this. And I want to tell you more about that. And I want to tell you in a way that you'll actually maybe hear it, right? So all this is in service of like trying to hear it. And this, by the way, especially acknowledgement, but this asking good, curious questions, getting a little ahead of myself, but actually is very helpful in terms of taming emotions. Not so that we can then switch completely over to just being super rational human beings, but it does actually take some of the emotional heat out of it. So I want to keep us moving so that we can get to that piece, because I do want to spend just a couple minutes talking about feelings. But so I said this, that, you know, we looked at the quantity of the 3 skills that we've been talking about. And now we also are talking about this flow in which we use the skills. And we should keep in mind that the quality of the skills also matters. So this is like just a couple of beats on like what high quality inquiry, advocacy, and acknowledgement look like. So high quality inquiry really does seek to learn. It's not meant to teach or cross-examine. We have to be humble. We have to like, the voice in our head is telling us that they're nuts and that there's no way on earth anything that they're saying has any merit. And we have to like figure out a way to like do the internal work to dial that back, if only for a minute. It's so hard. This is why I said we should really do like all the goal stuff, really like for a day. If you all want to sign up to come back tomorrow, we'll all just work on this, because it's most of the work is in your head, honestly. You have to get yourself to a place of feeling a little bit humble and a little bit curious at least. By the way, my very favorite sentence in the English language is this one. You don't have to come up with a question. You just say more about that, even when you feel like you don't want to. It's a very simple one. It's super effective because then they say what they think is most important. You don't have to find what's most important. They go there, so it's very helpful. High quality acknowledgement is listening. Just to know, listening without acknowledgement is incomplete. If you're going to actually listen, get credit for it by acknowledging that you heard what they said. If you actually listened, they assumed you did not. So if you can acknowledge, say like, oh, I think what I heard you say is X, or it sounds like this is really important to you, et cetera, you seal the deal. And like I said, acknowledgement is so, so powerful. This is a highly unused superpower. It's again, too, if you don't know what to say next, you feel so like, oh, what would I even say to this person? Just repeat back what they said. Like I teach mediation at Northwestern, and when we have new mediators sitting at the table between 2 parties in conflict, oftentimes, I remember this myself, you're like, what do I say next? I have no idea. What question should I ask? I have no idea. We just say, just repeat back what they just said. And often that's all it takes, right? Same thing happens in a conversation where you don't know what to do next. Just acknowledge what you just heard, and usually then they'll keep talking and tell you some more. Some of you are like, but I don't want them to keep talking. So what am I? And then when you advocate, and as I mentioned, it's really important that we also share our view. It is not helpful for you to just put your view somewhere else. You need it in the conversation, but you can put it in the conversation that's more likely to be influential, more likely to be heard. Especially the way to do that is to share your view, as a hypothesis to be tested. This is hard too, but you can get good at this. So to say things more like, so as far as I can tell, you know, lots of schools have been doing this, have been integrating this critical race theory into their curricula. And, you know, it seems to be working okay. I haven't heard a lot of disasters. What am I missing? Like, where do you see that differently? That's as far as I see it, as far as what I've noticed so far, but I could be missing something. What am I missing? You have to be willing to actually wonder about what else could be happening, right? So what am I missing? This is again where you see like the more open to persuasion I am, the more persuasive I end up being. It's very sort of Zen, counterintuitive. Like I have to let go of my goal to persuade, and then I end up very persuasive. Do you know people like this? I know people like this that like seems like they never dig in, and somehow I always want to say yes to what they have to say. Like they just are they seem so reasonable and so open, and so I'm very persuaded by them, right? That's our goal, is to try to get to a place where we are reasonable and open and curious. Doesn't mean we're going to take our very strong views and just throw them out the window, but we're going to put them in the conversation as our view so far. I could be proven otherwise, right? It's very powerful. All right. So with our last bit of time, I just want to talk a little bit about feelings. And so where it feels like what we've learned so far sort of meets its limit. So plenty of people, plenty of us, we know these things, right? Nothing I've said tonight is rocket science. I would be highly surprised if most of this feels really foreign to you all. We know we're supposed to ask curious questions. We know we're supposed to say back to them what they said to us. We know we're supposed to be actually curious. We know we're supposed to state our view in a way that is non-confrontational. And we don't do it. Correction, we do it all the time in cases where we don't care so much about it, in cases where we could go either way. At work all day long or with your families all day long, I bet you're doing these 3 skills and you're going low on the ladder all the time, naturally, skillfully. It's when we get into these conversations where it feels hard or there's deep difference or we feel strongly about it, that these skills that we're really good at otherwise just whoop, go right out the window. Like, where did they go? What happened? So when we get into those moments where it's like, it's still not working, I know I'm supposed to ask a question, but I cannot do it. There are a couple of things to think about. One is, remember, it really might still be your goal that's getting in the way. Your mindset might still be about proving your point and not at all about learning. So you can try to do a little bit more work there. But it could also be, oops, I'll go back to that. But it could also be about feelings, about strong emotions. So I just wanted to we don't have time to go deeply into this. This could also be like a week-long bit of work. But I wanted to just give you a couple of beats about this. So do we have any like neuroscientists in the room? Okay. I'm going to give you a highly amateur little bit of a mini lecture on neurophysiology. Highly amateur, okay? So a couple things about how our brains work, and many of you might know this, right? So up in the front of our heads, we have our neocortex. This is where we're doing our logical thinking, our problem solving, really like sort of the rational stuff, right? And then there's a lot of other parts of our brain. And then toward the back, we have these 2 little almond-shaped things in the back called the amygdala. The amygdala, does anyone know what the amygdala does? No?
There's something with feelings and stuff, because teenagers, I have a teenager and I'm learning that it's under construction right now. Its ability to interpret the emotions and stuff is wackadoo.
Yeah.
It's under construction and building to be an adult, and so it's something with emotions.
You're getting there, right? So the amygdala is the most primitive part of our brain. It is where our fight or flight or freeze sort of instincts live. It's like our lizard brain. It is not thinking. All it wants to know is whether I should run away or punch you in the face. Like that's all it wants to know, right? That's what's happening in the back of our brain. So when we are not triggered, we don't feel terribly strongly about something, we're doing our job, whatever, we're up in our rational brain doing all sorts of good problem solving and thinking. However, when a strong feeling sort of triggers us, a bunch of our resources, literally blood and oxygen, go back to the back of our brain and fuel the amygdala, because it's getting us ready to run away from the mastodon or whatever, right? It's still like very much this cave person brain that we have in the back. And so in moments where we have strong feelings, we are physiologically a little less capable to think well. We have less blood and oxygen up here than we did a moment ago, physiologically. And there's no like taking that out or not having that happen. That's just gonna happen. So when things are very, very hard, when conversations are hard, and you're feeling really stuck, you cannot come up with the right answer or the right question. You cannot get curious. It might be that feelings are getting in the way. The good news is that you can do something about your own strong feelings, and you can notice when other people are having their strong feelings, and there are some strategies to help those folks also bring a little bit more blood and oxygen back into the front of their heads. That's a real physiological thing that you're doing when you do these things, right? Like they've done studies, they show on the brain scan how that blood and oxygen moves around. So if we are the people that have really strong feelings, there are some things when we notice that we can do, like in the moment. They are very simple. You can just stop talking. Don't do the thing you wanted to do right away. Pause for a moment and take a big breath. Like it literally helps with the blood. You can count to 10 in your head. You can count backwards from 10 in your head, whatever works for you. Taking that moment to pause. And it feels to you like an eternity, but it's not. You can take a moment. By the way, have you ever known people who kind of are really good at pausing? You tend to think that, I don't know, I tend to think well, they really know what they're doing, or they seem to be thinking about something really hard, or, and it can give you quite a lot of sort of gravitas in a conversation, right? So don't be afraid to just take a break. And you can say it out loud, by the way. If you think actually this is going to be weird, you could say I just give me, I just want to take a second. I want to let that sink in, or I just want to be careful about thinking about how I want to share this. Right? You can say, I want to beat. Here's this weird thing. See yourself from above. This is called self-distancing. You can actually, it's a weird thing that you can do in the moment. You can actually try to imagine you're sitting on the ceiling looking down at you and the other person. I don't know why. Again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but something about doing that actually shifts something in your brain so that you can, again, direct more blood and oxygen to the front of your head. If you have time, you're in between conversations or ahead of a conversation, you're noticing lots of strong feelings, write them down, just see them, name them for yourself. It can help you get a little distance from them so that they're not sort of taking over. Another thing that is a really helpful, I highly recommend this as a preparation exercise or as an exercise after you've left a conversation that's frustrating and you didn't get anywhere. Try to fill in the rungs of their ladder. So, I mean, take a piece of paper and it's very, very simple. Here's their ladder. What's the data they're looking at? Try to imagine, what do I think they've seen? What is it that they're looking at? What have they heard? What have they experienced? And then ask yourself, what are things that might influence the way they interpret whatever it is that they're looking at? And by the way, we might in doing this realize I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know what they're looking at. I have no idea. That's a great insight, because then we're more likely to ask that question the next time around. I realize I have no idea what you're even looking at as you think about this question. What are you reading? What are you hearing, right? So whatever it is that they have in terms of data, I can ask myself, what might be influencing their interpretation of that data? Well, is it about how long they've lived in the community? Is it other experiences that they've had? Is it the fact that they come from a financial background and so they really see things through that angle all the time, right? So what is it that might be filtering into their interpretation? And again, if I realize I have no idea, that's a great insight. It's another place where you can start to get curious. And that all sits underneath, of course, their conclusion. Which is what right? You know their conclusion, which is you're wrong, right? But I want to know, tell me why you think that. What are you looking at, right? So as much as this might trigger me, and then I would do some work to calm my feelings. But doing this kind of an analysis ahead of a conversation or after a conversation can, again, kind of get you some distance on it, so that maybe it starts to both open up curiosity and soothe some of those kind of out of control feelings. When they are the people having strong feelings, and by the way, in many cases, we're both having strong feelings, so you might need all of these strategies. But in a conversation, when you notice that there's actually a lot of big feelings coming from their end, We saw some of this really skillfully done. Kate did some of this for us, right? So saying back what they said, so acknowledgement, right? You're fed up with all the back and forth. It doesn't have to be a big, long thing. It can just be quick bursts. Like you're annoyed, like you're fed up, right? The back and forth is killing you. Or naming the feeling itself, like you seem super frustrated. Or asking a curious question that explores the thing that seems to have the strong feeling attached to it. And for a lot of times what people say back to me is like, that's crazy because that strong feeling of theirs is just a giant can of worms to open up and I don't want to go anywhere near it. But it turns out if you ignore it, if you ignore that little thing over in the corner, that strong feeling, it just gets bigger and worse, right? Feelings crave acknowledgement. They want you to see them. And by the way, if someone has a really strong feeling about something, that's super helpful information. Why? Why are strong feelings helpful to me in the other person? Any thoughts? People are like, I have no idea. Those seem terrifying. Strong feelings are helpful because they indicate something important, right? Like if they feel strongly about it, it's because there's something very important to them in there. So then if I want to put on a little bit of a detective hat, it makes me maybe get my detective hat out because I'm like, what is it that is so important in there? What is it that you care about so much that you feel that strongly about it? So feelings can actually, if you can start to shift your mindset into a place of seeing feelings as a resource to help you find the most important things, get them up to the surface, that might help you to not be so worried about the feelings when they come up. But yes, asking questions that help to get them an opportunity to say what's underneath their feelings can be very helpful. And then when they say something and then you come back with some more acknowledgement, it's even more powerful. So that's all we have time for on feelings. They're everywhere. They are flooded through these conversations. And that's okay. Be kind and generous with yourself and your counterparts because we are all human beings just trying to muddle through all this. It's tricky, but we can just keep trying and it gets easier and easier. So what I would recommend to you around feelings or any of this that we've practiced is just try a little tiny bit of it out in a situation that's easy or in a situation that's not very hard. And just keep practicing from there and pushing into the places that are a little bit more difficult. So actually along those lines, to wrap things up, I would maybe have you just take a minute to jot down the one thing from this night's presentation that you want to try tomorrow in some context. So just a reminder, we covered thinking about our goal, trying to make sure we shift into a learning mindset. We talked about the 3 key communication skills and the balance and why that matters. We talked about the ladder of inference and how it helps us think about getting our conversations lower on the ladder with some skillful inquiry, acknowledgement, and advocacy. And then we just did these couple beats on feelings. So all of that, what's one thing you want to practice tomorrow in some context? So write that down. And in a minute, I'm just going to ask for a couple of your thoughts. All right, can I hear from a couple of you? What's one thing you want to do tomorrow? Right in the back there. You want to pick Pam? Just a second, we'll get you the mic.
Just pause because I have a tendency to just shoot right out and say something without thinking first. So to pause and stop and think, move it from back here to up here.
Awesome. Yeah, a powerful, powerful pause. And all of us can do that. That's a really easy one. Yep. Who else? Who else would like to share? Up here?
Mine is what I don't want to do, and that's the backfire effect. Sort of take a step back and not just say rational argument. That's just going to make things worse.
Great. So being aware of that possible backfire effect and sort of maybe shifting how we choose to approach some of these conversations, right? So a lot of times, if you're like me, what we end up doing is at home, we're We're preparing our case. Point number 1, point number 2, point number 3. I'm going to make sure I say point number 4, right? And we're just like getting girded up for this battle, which then just leads us to simply advocate for that list that we came up with. But instead to think like, maybe that's actually going to be counterproductive. How could I do this differently? That starts to open up a new approach. Great. Anybody else that wants to share one thing you'll do tomorrow? Yep, go ahead.
So this isn't exactly sharing. I just wanted to tell you this was a very, very helpful presentation.
Oh, that's a nice.
And I
of you.
thank you so much.
That's so nice.
That's all I
so
wanted
nice.
to say.
That's so nice of you. Well, that's a lovely note to end on. Yeah, so that was really all I had for you tonight. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to come out. This is one of my favorite things in the world to do. So I appreciate the opportunity to come do it, especially in person. No offense to all of you at home. Next time, come around. You can do some work with us too. But thank you so much. And thank you very much to Kimberly and Pam for hosting. And Pam, I think you wanted to say a couple words to see us out.
First of all, Connie, thank you for a fantastic program. Connie developed this specifically for the Glenview Library and for the League of Women Voters, who supports civic engagement as well as personal relationships. And obviously, as we can see in our current culture, there's a lot of conflict and a lot of conflict when we're engaging civically and politically. So thank you for developing this. If everybody could give Connie a round of applause. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You also made it very entertaining and engaging on a really serious topic. So we really appreciate that.
Great. Thank you.
And so just a few comments before, I know all of you want to go home and practice these skills, but a few comments. So this is a second program in a 3-part series. The first was a collaboration with Northbrook Library. It was on news literacy. And the third program is going to be in collaboration with the Glencoe Library. And we are currently developing that program, so please stay tuned for that.